Thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. Today we have an interesting topic and a guest speaker to talk about it. Talk all about secondary suites. And with that, I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Joshua Hose. He was here with us a couple of years ago to talk about secondary suites. As some of you may know, the Amnesty program might be coming to an end, so we'll see what Josh has to say about that. So let's give Josh a round of applause.
Awesome. Thanks, bud.
There you go.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll just introduce myself briefly. My name is Joshua Howes, and I've worked at the city now for just over 15 years. Undergrad was in urban studies, and my MBA from Haskayne here in Calgary. Been working in planning and development for those 15 years that I've been at the city. Started at the front counter, call center, bylaw, that type of stuff, and then eventually worked into some leadership roles in there and change management, and then worked as the executive advisor to the director for about 4 years, and then got asked to go do something about secondary suites. Suites has been kind of a thing for Calgary for more than just those 3 years, so not everything that's happened has been under my watch for sure, so there's a lot of credit due to a lot of people that have done some great work, in my opinion, at the city of Calgary over suites over the years, because when I first started there, it was a pretty awful situation. I remember most phone calls I got were, my friend has a basement suite, he's trying to legalize it, and I would say, yeah, don't bother, and they would hang up, and that was kind of the phone call that we used to get. And so we've come a long way from there, but just excited to share. So tonight I'll do a tiny bit. If you were here last year, 2 years, whatever it was ago, there'll be a tiny bit of repeat, about 10% of what I'll show. The rest of the program should be kind of brand new. If you recall from before, I am really interactive. In fact, there's some slides later on where we will sit there until somebody answers the question, because I want to hear a little bit more from you guys as much as you're hearing from me. Fairly candid and open in conversation, and I'll share whatever I'm aware of and what I know, and you can take that for what it's worth. So I had a little bit of fun. I always try to have a little bit of fun with the titles. So secondary no one, which really just means that Calgary is the leader in secondary suites across the country. We started the registry back in 2015 as a, I'm going to jump ahead actually and just kind of put that. Back in 2015 as a non-mandatory option for people who were trying to legalize secondary suites. And we ended that 3-year period with 430 legal secondary suites. We then started to make it mandatory in 2018. At which point in time you can start to see kind of the growth that's happened in suites. The Amnesty program, which we'll talk about a little bit, also launched in 2018. And then you'll see that steady growth. And then you'll see the big jump in 2024, which is when we launched the incentive program. So that's the first time I came around. We were about to or going to launch the incentive program. That launched in 2024 in, I think April, May 3rd. May 3rd, 2024. And you can see the growth that we've had ever since then. Obviously, 2026 number is just a start. You can see, it doesn't show up great here. There's a light purple box above that dark purple box, which indicates what we expect to come this year. And so we'll be close to 30,000 by the end of the year, and we'll crest into 30,000 somewhere in early 2027. Which is kind of what you expect to see. And so those volumes and those numbers are the largest across the country, which is pretty cool to get to work with. But if I take you back before that graph, or at the start of that graph, you'll see that we had less than 500 legal suites in the city. Suites they weren't fully defined. Some people actually built them as duplexes from a code perspective and from a land use perspective, but they were truly just what they were trying to do was put a suite in, but it wasn't easy. The land use path wasn't easy. The code path wasn't really there. And so a lot of people built duplexes as a top and a bottom with full separation between the two. Every single one of them required a development permit. As some of you may have been around for, there was also public hearings for almost every single one of them as well, which required a zoning change beforehand, which mostly just turned into sad stories about how I want my mom to live in the basement and I can't do it because my zoning doesn't allow for it, and created a really nasty situation. So that was 2013 era in suites. We spent a lot of time in enforcement playing the oven hokey pokey, we used to call it, which essentially was that we would show up for an inspection and the oven wouldn't be there, and then we would leave and then the oven would go back. And so we played that game a whole bunch. We would find it in the garage or in a closet or something like that. And because of the lack of ability to enforce effectively, that was good enough to get away with your illegal suite back in the day. 2018, we kind of jump ahead that little bit. We started to see a little bit of momentum and a bunch of changes happen for the city. The first is that development permits were not always required anymore. We started to see permitted suites in certain areas. You met the rules, you went straight to a building permit, and you were able to start to construct right away. We launched the original version of the Amnesty program. I have a whole slide on that later, so we'll get into it a little bit. And that reduced some of the requirements around existing suites and what you had to do from a code perspective. And then we also added secondary suites as a listed use in the majority of all residential zones across the city. RC1 properties, which is, as you guys probably well know, about 55% of properties was discretionary, meaning it was allowed, but still required a development permit and wasn't guaranteed. But alas, everyone at least had the opportunity to apply for a suite at the time. We also then kind of shifted away from our old enforcement model and started shifting to a support, education first type piece where we stopped trying to fee and fine people necessarily at that moment, and we started helping to try to get them to legalize their suites. And so that's what kind of happened in 2018. Jump ahead to 2023 when the program launched. We had started to see, as you saw in the graph earlier, which we'll get back to, some momentum towards developing a legitimate registry of suites, but recognized that we were still missing the mark in certain areas. And so we launched that program really just with that thought of increasing support for safe and affordable housing across the city and trying to give value to the registry. So now we had, a couple thousand people started to get on the registry. Is like, well, what does that really mean if 90% of the rental stock isn't registered? It's not really giving you not much value for the people that had taken the time and energy to actually register their suites. We started seeking for different ways to support and engage. And then, we wanted to internally reduce handoffs. That's what that talks about. So you'll hear over the last 2 years, we actually went through a program where your plans examiner was your inspector. That isn't in place anymore. We've had to shift away from that as resourcing has changed. But that was a really interesting experience as well, where we started to see the person making the calls on the building permit also knowing then that they were having to enforce that on the inspection side, which led to increased information up front to help people be successful with their inspections later, because the person was accountable, because they were the ones showing up later having to say no if the person didn't know everything they needed to do in the space. And we saw a lot of success and a lot of positive feedback from people whose experiences really improved through that methodology. And so we saw a lot of wins from that, and we'll see what that does long term in terms of how we manage it. And we launched a guidebook, which is a great resource. I encourage anyone to take a look at it. It is truly kind of like a layman's version. A bit intimidating, 68 pages. You don't need to read it cover to cover, but it does actually walk you through each path and each piece of a secondary suite process that you might go through converting a space, and it does so for anybody to understand, which is great. So you can take a look at that. So that was kind of the program launch that we saw back in 2023. Highlights of those pieces now. So 2023 or 2013. Kind of highlights. Incentives, there wasn't anything. We had zoning that wasn't really in a good place. Our enforcement was ineffective. And from a safety perspective, you had to always meet full requirements. 2018, we launched a number of those things. So less DPs, we started waiving the fees, which is actually still in place as of right now, till the end of the year. Most zones, if not 99% of properties were allowed education first and the minimum life safety. And then you can see now the volume. We're actually over 26,000 legal registered suites in the city now, which is an awesome achievement. We've had a financial incentive, obviously, that's been running for the last 2 years. I'll talk a little bit more about that. It was permitted. If anybody wanted to sit through 3 days of public hearing and council back on July 21st through 24th of this year, like I got to, you'll have heard that permitted suites while rezoning was taken off, the permitted aspect of suites has now been implemented across every zone. So RC1 zoning now has suites listed as a permitted use. We didn't get backyards in that, so backyards are still listed as discretionary, but we did get secondary suites through that change. And so that means that as long as you meet the rules, no DP, straight to building permit, that whole sped up process exists across the entire city in terms of that. And then, yeah, that leads to this kind of volume increase that you can see that's happened over the years, which is awesome. And I'd like to always remind everybody that the city has built 0 secondary suites over that time period. This is always a private investor, a homeowner, someone that is living in the city of Calgary that has taken the time to do the things required to provide a safe space for people to live in. And the number is great because we feel like we are a part of that, but it's a partnership. And we don't build secondary suites. Say that again? No. I'm saying that the city doesn't build anything. Yeah, we don't build anything. Every one of these was built by somebody else. So we're just kind of a partner in this situation. We try and lay a pathway or pave a roadway that makes it easier, but at the end of the day, we don't build secondary suites. So our success is your success and the city of Calgary's success as citizens, but not as a corporation or as a company. PDS doesn't build any of these things. So just always a big thank you to anybody who has done it. It actually, like, I love it in the room. Who's built a secondary suite along the way? A number of people, yeah, or lived in one, legally or illegally. I always found it funny at the front counter. I used to hire people, and I swear half the people I hired at the time that we hired them out of school lived in an illegal secondary suite. It was literally half the people, yeah. All right, so suites right now. So yeah, as you see, we're just surpassing 26,000 registered suites. Existing suites, the minimum safe life day ends in December. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here. So this is a conversation around the Amnesty. So the Amnesty program is a bit confusing because a number of things have launched over the years. But what this is referring to is the code amnesty, which basically means that suites built before 2018, March of 2018, have qualified for a reduced requirement around code. Primarily, we're talking about split heat and the sound requirements. So in current code for a secondary suite, not only do you need the egress windows, interconnected smoke and fire alarms, smoke seal, which is basically a drywall seal, along with a protected exit if that's required. You also require a separate heating source and system and air circulation system that's separate from the other property. And you required sound dampening requirements between the two. For the purpose of the code amnesty for suites that existed prior to 2018, whether they've been bought and sold 3 times or not, if they existed prior to 2018, you've been involved in the code amnesty. That removes that requirement for separate heating, air circulation source, and the sound requirements, which is generally the largest cost item when you're converting an illegal suite or you're building a legal suite to begin with. And so that has been under, as you can see, it's been an extremely productive program, but also a very desired program. And so it has actually seen 3 full-time extensions, which is why we kind of half joke when you say that it'll end. I can almost guarantee you, I know the people that sit in the room that have these conversations, the amnesty is ending in December. That will be it. So any permit intake done for a purpose of the amnesty prior to December 31st will still be under those processes. But after that, you'll meet full code requirements moving forward. We'll see what happens to the actual permit intake and piece. There's some conversation around whether or not that'll move to full drawing requirements that haven't been required for an existing suite for the last 8 to 10 years, and whether or not there'll be some other changes to the fees and stuff like that. But for sure, the code piece will come to an end. The other thing that we expect to come to the end is the development permits associated with suites and backyard suites have been free for the last 8 years. I suspect that will also change going into the new year. We'll see what happens at budget in November, but the plan is to reinstitute essentially those fees and costs associated with these things. And so, yeah, there's still a four-month window where some of these pieces will still be around. And are worth looking into. And so that's the amnesty piece. I talked a little bit earlier just about July 24th. So council did approve a permitted across the city. which really does reduce the need for development permits for secondary suites, which is great. We continue to push the educational piece, and then compliance is evolving. And so always here talking to a real estate group at Krebs a couple months ago, and had a really good discussion around, when we had 1,000 legal registered suites, it was really hard for us to justify why we were going after your illegal suite and not the other however many were over there. And when we couldn't tell somebody, hey, don't rent an illegal suite, because on Rent Faster, 95 or 96% of the suites being offered was an illegal suite, it made enforcement extremely difficult, because it was always just somebody, not everyone. It wasn't a large approach. With 26,000 registered suites, that changes things. You'll see in a slide in a little bit that we are actually cresting to the point where we believe across the city of Calgary, and of course nobody could ever guarantee this, that we are actually almost at 61%, somewhere in around 60% registered versus unregistered suites, which is a huge barrier to start to cross. I'm not sure whether it's 70 or 75 or 80% that would have kind of this further multiplier effect in the market, where unregistered suites will truly start to become something of lower quality, lower class, that just doesn't exist in the same framework for people. But certainly cresting 50%, getting somewhere close now to 60% is a good start towards that. And so they do continue to be a great investment opportunity, which is why I get invited to these types of things, and to get to hang out with people interested in finding a way to invest and create some value. Oh wow, another great registered slide on the screen. But yeah, here's the tangible effects that we've seen. So in 2022, we started tracking just a cross-section. There's recency bias that exists in this. There's reduction, certain platforms that we might use to check or whatnot. But essentially back in 2022, we saw about 17% of offered open and available suites were registered, and the rest were unregistered. In 2024, we saw somewhere around 46%. And the most recent test that we did back in June of this year gave us a sense that we had somewhere around 61%. Now, I'm not claiming we're exactly there. Like I said, a 1 month, a cross-section of what was offered and available. But certainly that's something to consider what that looks like in the city of Calgary. I can say that the sample size is quite large. I believe our 2024 sample size was something like 600. I think we got somewhere in the 400 range this year when we did the check. And so it's not like across 10 suites. It's a significant sample size, but it's still a limited cross-section. I don't know if we checked in July, the numbers might be different. It's hard to say for sure. These are the same numbers that I quote at council. Mostly when I get asked, how many illegal suites are there still? I say, well, if there's 26,000 registered suites and 61% of the ones are being offered for rent, then you can assume how many illegal suites you think that exist still in the city. And so that's what we're still looking at, and why compliance enforcement action can start to evolve for the city of Calgary over the next little while. And so that's what you see. This is an interesting one, and where I'd want to start to hear from you guys a little bit. I've been around this long enough to hear different stories. Before I share what my belief on the thought on the value and what it does for somebody's property when you put a suite in, whether it be a unregistered or a registered suite, what the value looks like. What does that look like in change in terms of what you sell the price for, and what does that look like in change in terms of rent? So what's everybody's thoughts in this room around, if you were to take a semi-detached, one with a suite, one without, registered, or an unregistered one on one side and a registered one on the other side, what are we looking at in terms of the difference in value that you would generally see? And just start talking. Don't even put your hand up. Some of the realtors? What do you think it does in the market for you?
Less than after the amnesty period ends.
Yeah.
It was super valued at the beginning.
Sure.
And I think it actually kind of phased out a little bit in
Sure.
terms of the value it added.
Sure.
For an illegal one, right?
Yeah.
For an illegal one.
Like an illegal one was, according to an appraiser, it was, you can't really count it, but then it's like, well, they're basically the same now because it's so
Sure.
easy to get done.
Sure.
But now you won't be able to get it
Yes.
done, and then now the cost goes up to 70 grand,
Sure.
and then the actual value of that suite might become
Sure.
more relevant.
Sure. Anybody else's thoughts? What's anybody else's thoughts on what the value might
Just
be?
the real estate people that answer.
Yeah, it could be anybody. I'm sure, like you said, I saw 7 or 8 hands when I said that people own suites. So what do you think it added when you put your suite in?
I mean, if you're doing it from like a code perspective, whoever's purchasing the property next knows that it's done properly and it's passed inspection.
And so what do you think that's worth to them when you try to sell it?
I mean, I think it should increase the value of
Sure.
the property.
I think everybody thinks it increases, but how much? Yeah, go ahead.
I think it depends a lot on the building and the buyer. One of the big problems that you have across the city now is people, let's say they're looking at starter homes. A lot of traditional starter homes are now having suites put in. That means that those starter homes no longer have any storage space or entertainment space, right? There's no finished basement in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
So it makes them a lot less desirable
Sure.
to some extent. If you're looking from the perspective of an investor, obviously it's a different story.
Yeah.
So to an investor, I mean, then it depends on the neighborhood and however much extra rent you can put in depending on the features of the suite. But if you're a developer looking to miraculously build single family or, detached homes, probably not much.
Sure.
If you're selling directly to first-time home buyers, let's say, if you're building them as condos, probably adding something to it. I don't know. Is that a controversial thing?
I'd say from the renter's perspective, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Whether it's illegal or legal, because they're not gonna know anyway.
Yeah,
So for the most part, I think you're probably getting some tenants who are gonna rent the basement for the same amount.
sure.
And if you're an investor living up top, maybe that's not your biggest priority, having a legal suite.
hmm Now, I'm guessing you don't have a 20-year-old daughter? No. So how about the dads in the room that has a 20-year-old daughter? Does it matter if the suite your daughter is about to rent is registered or not?
Well, I can say that I have adult children that I put in suites for university.
Mm-hmm.
And my oldest son, who's 29 now, when he was 18, and I went looking, we rented this tiny little bachelor basement, and the wires were sticking out everywhere, and the faucet was falling off, and like things were like it was just terrible.
Yeah.
But it was cheap, and
Yeah.
it was supposed to, and the window was this big.
Sure.
It was really bad.
Yeah.
And I did not feel safe having my son there.
Mm.
But what do you?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
All of us we are working in the building industry.
Sure.
We are responsible to provide the
Mhm.
building or home more comfortable and safer.
Sure.
Even city. So in a legal suite, the inspector come and check it. The landlord didn't cheat. They have to put the smoke alarm. They
Right.
have to share it. And providing the separate heating source is very important
Mhm.
because in the basement, none of the Calgary, and if they don't have a secondary furnace, they cannot use the basement in the winter because it's
Sure.
cold. So if you want to rent it, it's safe for the person and safe for us
Yeah.
because for example, owner, they have to buy a home insurance.
Exactly. Yeah.
City of Calgary, one of the responsibilities is provide the home for the people.
Sure.
Just make them safer, more comfortable. So
Yeah.
Safety is important.
Sure.
Because it's safe.
Yeah. I know when we did some engagement 3 years ago, safety came in as the third most important thing for the renters that were involved in that engagement in general for a secondary suite. Price was number 1, location number 2, and safety was number 3. Yeah, go ahead.
To go back to the value of the legal suite, when I'm running comps and I see in all caps legal basement
Yes.
suites, I use that as a negotiation. The rule of thumb is 100,000. So if I'm trying to buy a property without a legal suite
Yeah.
and I'm looking at a comp with, I'll usually value that at $100,000 or more. It might be a little high, but that's
Interesting.
kind of what it is.
Sure.
Are you valuing a legal suite $100,000 more, or are you valuing an illegal suite $100,000 less?
I honestly, I really value illegal basement suites. I tell people that more than 50% are illegal, and so with that, like I still value them. I get really excited if it's illegal, but if there's no suite at all, and I'm running comps and there's one with a legal suite, then I'll go back to the seller and I'll say, you know what, we can't use this comp unless we're deducting 100K off that price. That's just my.
So yeah, so wheelhouse there was the thought that a legal suite is worth 100K and an illegal one depends if you're willing to play in that game, but certainly not 100, certainly less than that. I generally use different thoughts on mine. I know in the new space, and you brought up a great point with the new single family homes going in. I don't know if anybody bought a starter home over the last couple of years, but I think the way that it goes is they sit down and they have the list of the marble countertop that you can add and the new appliance package, and then they list the secondary suite, and it says plus $500,000 or $500 a month instead of minus $500 a month. And so what we did see for a little while was not only if you put a suite in when you first bought, you actually increased the amount that you could spend on the house, not just to get the suite, but on other comps, because they valued the income that you were going to get on a monthly basis higher than the cost of the suite, which made it like everyone was checking the box because it was a no-brainer. Because by going there, you had, you know, $600K from your broker, and you showed up and you bought a $750,000 home with 50 extra K and upgrades because you took the basement and made it a suite. On those suites, we're seeing anywhere from $70,000 to $90,000 to build those ones, and so 100K is probably within that realm, around the value or the cost at least of a legal suite. I always kind of use 30 and 50 is the two numbers I use. I think that people value that illegal suite somewhere around $30,000 more, and might value that registered legal suite more like $50,000 more.
And those are the numbers Santa and I use actually. We're usually 30 to 60.
30 to 60?
Yeah.
And it's probably going to go to 10 to 70.
Yeah.
But once
That would be-
once the true cost will actually be $8,000.
That's right. And yeah, and when we've seen the amnesty piece in place, you've seen an illegal suite, and this goes back to your point, the conversion has gone from what used to be 50,000 down to like 10 or 15 often. And you meet all the rules at the 10 or 15. And with that going away, we'll see how that affects an illegal suite's value, in that people that knew what they were doing knew that for 10, 15, they could get it done, and now it'll be 50. So that value of the illegal suite may actually come down, funny enough, with the end of amnesty, whereas really the intent of amnesty was to try and get rid of them. And now it will take ending the amnesty before that financial pressure starts to hit some of those suites. So unfortunately for those that aren't here in this room and don't watch online later, they don't know that their illegal suite is about to drop in value significantly in 4 months. So if you got one, do something with it now, because I suggest that the value will significantly drop. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to add that I see the case where after the amnesty is over, there will be now grades of suites. Okay, this one is after amnesty because it has no sort of heat.
Sure.
Whereas this one was legalized before, and it's not as comfortable, and I can't control my temperature, and therefore there will be 3 tiers: illegal, legalized,
and legalized with the old rules. Which is fair. I think the one thing that I would say on that front is that already existed. Some basement suites are in a 1911 house or a 1947 house in Renfrew, and that's always been there, but it's a 1947 house, and that is what it is, versus one that just got built or upgraded or renovated, and it has a certain level of value change to it. So that certainly exists already, but you're not wrong. And that will only exist for a period, right? We've seen somewhere around 9,800, so I'll suggest 10,000. Suites out of the 26,000 have in some way, shape, or form taken advantage of the amnesty period. That doesn't mean none of those 10,000 have split heat, but in some way, shape, or form have been involved in the amnesty period. And so, yeah, it's about, I guess, if you want to think of a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 thing, we're kind of almost there.
Can you just clarify what that 10,000 was?
Yeah, so in the last, of the 20,000 registered, 10,000 are in some way, shape, or form associated with the amnesty program.
Oh, okay, the other ones were new builds.
Were new builds, well, or conversions, but were done after 2018 and had to meet the full code requirements. All those pieces, yeah.
I have a question
Yeah, for
about
sure.
illegal suites.
Sure.
They're illegal. Are people allowed to live in them?
No. I mean, you can live in there, but you can't have a separate space from the upstairs. So at the basis, and I'm not a code guy really, and I don't get too crazy into it, but in 2007, 2008, that code change that caused all of these problems. The requirements were really that if the two people are not living together, I don't want to say family because I think, or unless you take a really broad definition of family, if they're not living together, that means that if something is to happen, they have no reason to inform person B, I don't even know the person's name possibly, of bad situation. And that separation of ability to get out without seeing, to not interact, to not speak to them if something happens bad or whatnot, is the separation that really requires the increased code requirements. And so when you talk about an internet-connected fire alarm, well, if smoke's in the basement, that person knows, I gotta get out. But the person upstairs doesn't know. And that interconnected smoke and fire alarm is to indicate to the person upstairs, hey, wait a second, something's going on downstairs. Maybe it's not a fire, maybe you don't have to, but you need to look into this. You need to figure this out because you're now in danger. And so that's the type of thing that's put in place through the separation in order to cause that.
So what about insurance? Are they insuring illegal suites?
My experience is that people do. I didn't think that this would be the case. And then I had a phone call 14 years ago with somebody and they're telling me the story and I'm sitting there nodding, and I'm somebody that actually has had 2 different occasions of dealing with a large insurance thing. I lived in an apartment in Fairview up north when I lived there a couple of years with my wife, and our apartment burnt down. Had a massive fire, as well as I was through the 2013 flood, and our parkade in my condo unit or whatnot flooded. And in both cases, I dealt with what you would expect to deal with insurance, and I am not bad-mouthing anyone. I understand that they have to do what they got to do to provide the service they provide, and they don't necessarily just hand over money. They make sure. But my understanding from this guy on the phone with me who had a fire in his illegal secondary suite and got his insurance payout was that when he first started paying for his insurance, he called them somewhere along the way and told them that he was now renting a space, and they increased his insurance amount. And so whether or not he legalized it, because they accepted additional funds for the change that had happened, they were still on the hook for that. That's not to say that everyone that has put in a legal suite and had a fire has been covered by insurance, but it is possible that there is some coverage that will extend depending on the circumstances. But I would suggest it's probably the biggest risk you take by owning or renting or keeping an illegal suite is the larger overall protection of your investment is not necessarily there.
Well, and also your liability for someone's
100%.
loss of life.
And so going back to the split heat piece and going back to your comment around the 3 tiers, depending on how you look at the fire data of where most fires have been caused or where they happen and whatnot, you'll actually see a larger number than you'd like to think caused by, actually you think kitchens, these are things often associated with heaters. So people put space heaters into their basement suite because they don't control the heat. They don't control that situation. The guy upstairs does, and so they have to supplement their heat in the basement. If you go back to the fire in the one with the 3 teenagers that died in Calgary, that's exactly what that was. It was a space heater that lit a blanket on fire and caused 3 deaths. So it's actually more common than you'd like to see, where it's actually a heating problem, where the ability to control your own heat has caused people to take third party, and then something happens with that. So it is something to understand and consider why code sometimes feels like it's asking for something that just makes no sense, but there's often some backing and a real good reason as to why it's there. Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to confirm with you, but the Amnesty program doesn't apply to new suite that were built?
No, it only applies to suites that existed prior to March of 2018.
So if you want to get legalized an illegal suite?
So right now, there's an intake process that you would go through still. We still consider it an existing suite. We still only require photos and an information form to be filled out. Also right now, the cost for that permit is about half the cost of a new suite. But when you get your permit issued, the code requirements will remain the same as a new suite, meaning that your split heat will still have to be in place. So the process itself is still a little bit easier, but the code requirements remain the same as if it was a brand new suite.
That's the challenge when it's an existing suite, is you have to open up and ceiling to run heating ducts or an HRV, and then you have to do soundproofing. So it's quite disruptive. if the
It is.
suites
It
are
can
in
be.
place.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is the incentive program going to remain?
Good question. Right now, where are we at? I guess I don't know if I have a slide for it. So the incentive program is officially in a waitlist mode. If you don't tell anybody on social media tonight, tomorrow there is actually a news drop that will essentially announce the closure of the incentive program. I'm saying that, well, yeah, we moved to a waitlist a couple weeks ago, and then we took a little bit of time. We have a certain amount of our funding comes from a municipal budget line item that is actually a yearly budget line item. And so we wanted to see what was going to happen with that. We truly won't know that until November, but we now have over 350 on the wait list, which equates to somewhere around $3 million worth if we were to move them all over. And right now I can tell you, I don't think I'm going to find $3 million in funding. So likely we're coming to a close on that, but crazier things have happened. I still haven't put a total close to that wait list on the possibility that it continued. I don't know if I actually put a slide in about that tonight, but like I said, there'll be a news release tomorrow. You'll see the numbers. But what the numbers will really tell you on that is that we've spent somewhere around $45 million on the program. Most of that is federal funding. $4 million of it has been the cities, and we'll spend another $4 million of the cities this year. Total of 61 eventually. It will have supported and incentivized just over 7,000 suites. And so over a 2-year period, basically exactly we'll have supported and incentivized 7,000 suites, which is just over about half of what has been built. So over that same period, we've built about 13,000. And so the incentive has done that. For anyone that didn't know too much about the incentive, we essentially offered up to $10,000 associated with those 5 key safety elements that I mentioned earlier. So your egress windows, interconnected smoke and fire alarm, smoke seal separation, protected exit if you need it, and then the split heat piece. And it was up to $10,000, and each of those elements were worth a certain amount. So if you didn't have to do it all, you qualified for a little bit less than the 10. We also had a accessibility element to that, and we paid a couple people out to build accessible suites, which means at grade and or accessible through a lift for a wheelchair. And then we also had an energy efficiency portion to that that's paid out for about 40% of the projects to be Energy Star in terms of the furnace, the windows, potentially meeting those requirements and everything else as well. So that program has, in my opinion, been extremely, extremely successful. And when we look back at those numbers and you look at the jumps, we average somewhere around 2,300 to 2,500 suites a year for the 3 years leading up to the incentive. And we've more than doubled that in the 2 years that we've had the incentive in place. Awesome. Okay, I'm sure we can, any other conversation in and around suites itself, we can continue to have, but I wanted to move forward a little bit. Our program has evolved over the last year or so to include some backyard suite stuff as well. And so I wanted to kind of just throw a little bit out there and hear from you guys a little bit about backyard suites, if anybody in the room has done and heard anything about that. Currently, there's actually less than 400 backyard suites in the city of Calgary. Now, I say that because in my mind, it's way harder to hide a backyard suite that's not registered than it is a basement suite. There's a good realtor friend of mine that I've worked with over the last number of years, and she actually thinks it's more like 600 something. So she thinks that there's 200 illegal backyard suites out there. I don't know how that truly exists. I think mostly that's people just turning attached garages into living spaces. I wouldn't consider that a backyard suite necessarily the same way. But alas, that's where we're at. But we expect, and we've seen about 200 of those built in the last 2 years. So if you can imagine up until that point 2 years ago, Calgary had less than 200 legal backyard suites, which is crazy to me. But that's true. It's not a form that you see in Calgary. And so to me, it's actually an extremely underutilized housing form. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, we do mention it as an ADU, which is accessory dwelling unit, is what they confirm. A lot of people call them mother-in-law suites. Some people will call them carriage houses. Essentially, generally speaking, I mean, you can get technical on the definition of what it is, but either an at-grade unit in the backyard or an above garage suite. That's generally what would qualify for this. We do see more above garage suite than at grade, but there's an entire market that exists for mobility accessible, limited people looking for at-grade backyard suites. That's a huge market.
So I think we've seen like 20 plus terms for those backyard suites at this point.
Yeah.
Like on MLS, like there's a variety of terms and there's no agreement on what the terminology is.
Sure.
So lots of different ones. I have a question for you actually on
sure.
that program. So I love those personally. There is actually quite a few illegal ones, but not nearly as many as basement suites. Is there any how would I say that, will from the city to launch a similar program to the basement suite one?
So this makes me really sad. We launched a program. It was really successful and already closed. We're once again actually technically on a wait list for it, but we got an additional, so with the success of the basement suite program, the feds threw another 10 million.
Yeah, so that's the incentive, right?
And we
was
threw
a
that
really
program.
nice one. But is there an amnesty program?
No.
Okay. Because those are tricky. Like I had discussions with city inspectors on this, on how do you legalize an existing illegal backyard suite? Because a basement suite, it's clear cut.
Sure.
It's like, this is what you have to do
It's
to
difficult.
legalize it. A backyard suite, what I've been told before is we don't know.
Yeah. It's extremely difficult because the requirements are based off of I don't want to use the word imaginary, but we like to use the word an imaginary line that is a separation between the two dwellings that creates all your distances. And so it can get really complex when it's not designed at the front end for the purpose of code. And I don't want to say that it's impossible to legalize some of them, but I would say it's extremely financially difficult to legalize some of the illegals if they've been done when they shouldn't have been, where they shouldn't have been.
So how's the enforcement going to be, you think? Like if someone has an illegal suite and the city comes in and they're like, hey, you know what, I'll legalize it. What do I need to do? Do you know if there's...
Certainly that was a possibility. It's hard to say how commonly I would see an illegal backyard suite come in to our purview. I don't know if it's because every neighbor just assumes it must be legal and okay if they've gone ahead and done it or what, but I mean, I've run this thing for I can't say that I've seen more than 2 complaints about an illegal backyard suite. I don't know for sure. I'm just starting to understand backyard suites. I'm still learning a little bit along with everybody else in the city, I think, yeah.
They're very popular in Seattle and everyone does them, like every smart investor tries to, it's worth the cost.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Which is interesting. So I had a property in Bridgeland that I was going to build on, and ended up shutting the whole thing down through COVID because the prices just made it not tenable for me. But we had a backyard suite in that, and I can say based off of the original expectations and what we would get for a 2-bedroom backyard above grade suite in Bridgeland in cost, is that backyard suite would have covered more than the interest on the cost of the entire property, and the project was a $2 million project. And so if your rent was covering your interest on a $2 million project, you can justify it a whole long ways. What I also can say though is for some reason at sale time, it doesn't seem to equate. Almost everyone will say, you know, it'll cost you $300 or $350 to put it in, and you go to try and sell it and you just can't find $350K for it. And so that's a really interesting anomaly to me. But I also think that might change. I think that might change. Yeah, which is interesting. But here in Calgary, like I hear, and you can't do that here. I know that's what they did in California. California has split titles. Toronto started split titles. I don't even call that a backyard suite anymore. It's not. It's just a new way to create, you know.
They're even splitting a house in half and turning it into a duplex and making 2 titles.
And then 2 titles for that. Yeah. So that's different. To me, I wouldn't consider that what we're talking about here as a backyard suite, because that is now just a single family home on a really small parcel. That's what that is.
So are they going to try to encourage more backyard suites? Because from what I've heard, with the immigration to Calgary, they're expecting about another 2 million people by 2050.
Yeah, so I would say, so the city did run an incentive program. I guess I could run a little bit on it. So we launched March 2nd of this year. And it's now in a waitlist form. I can say we lasted open about 5 months before we had totally saturated the funding. So those agreements are in place, and that expects to do 300. So we'll almost double our backyard suites over the next 2-year period through this incentive program. So does the city want more backyard suites? I would say yes. I would say it's an underutilized housing form. I think one of the other things that we saw with backyard suites through the rezoning process was that where a lot of people were speaking out about the front house and that semi-detached that was showing up in the backyard next door. I'm not going to have a personal commentary on that. But a backyard suite all of a sudden started to feel like way less intrusive than that. I think the form, the size, the height limitations, and the fact that it's owned by the person creates a lot of differences in how that is now causing or affecting their neighbors. And so we've seen a much larger general willingness to allow for backyard suites in the last 2 years through the rezoning and dezoning process than we did before that. And so I'd say that our timing on the incentive program was very appropriate and that we've seen a lot of success. 98% of backyard suites at DP stage are approved, 98%. And so that gives a bit of an indication about where the city's stance is on it as well. Yeah, go ahead.
If I'm not mistaken, during this blended rezoning RCG, they allowed to have basement suite and backyard suite.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, RCG allows for that, and that's gone now. Yeah, if you want to go back into the council footage, I mean, council decisions are always kind of hard because sometimes the vote says something that didn't actually happen at council. Can't explain that fully tonight, and it's not my space to do so. But there was a vote specifically on that element at the end of dezoning, where they were taking it off, where the vote went 7-8. And so both backyard and basement lost 7-8 at council. There was specifically one councillor that said that he actually supports it, but just not right now, based off of the political atmosphere around dezoning without any changes or whatnot. And so I would say that the political will is extremely close to allowing both. And so in the new zoning bylaw that you might starts to see in the next 18 months or so, or some idea of what this council might approve on a new zoning bylaw 18 months from now, I think that you'll see that one for sure come up as a possibility. Also backyard suites were, they tried to see if they could make them permitted across the city. And that vote was, it was removed before the permitted basement suites went through. And so backyard suites didn't go through that way. But also in 18 months, it'll be really interesting to see, because a permitted backyard suite would give you a box that you're allowed to build in that gets approved. And that would create a really interesting aspect. It did not get approved. No. Yeah, all the changes to the actual rules, the Chamfer rule, the size rule, they were all removed before it passed. And so I would say technically there was no vote against it, but
almost however many percentage was asking for relaxation due to size.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might have had some difference.
It might have had some difference, and that is something where
When you write into the bylaw that you're allowed 75 square meters and a maximum of a 10% relax, you kind of said what you're going to do. And so they were really just trying to make that change and saying, hey, let's stop saying 75% with a 10% relax and say you're allowed 82. That's really what that change was going for. Not everybody necessarily saw it that way. Either way, the vote technically never really happened on it. It got removed, and it passed as it got removed. So that piece could come back once again, I think, in your new zoning bylaws as you see changes. But I don't know if I was a super high supporter of the increased size. I think the actual value to a backyard suite and the acceptance of it by the neighbors is to keep it limited in size and height. I think that's where it's appropriate. I get that there's going to be some people that want something different and it's maybe appropriate on their lot, depending on the size and the location and whatnot. And so I think there's a path and a place for larger ones. But I think when you're talking about a permitted, something that goes through for sure, the box on that should be reasonable. It should be a lower impact thing that says, hey, this is what you're allowed. You want to go beyond that, you can ask for permission, but you're allowed to have it.
those extra 10% would just the threshold which will allow you to comfortably do 2 bedrooms instead of 1.
It might. I think that the 2 bedrooms fits personally. And I've seen 3-bedroom versions, and I agree it gets tight. The 3-bedroom backyard suite is not a great thing. I've seen some pretty rough ones. But the 2-bedroom ones, I see good quality designs all the time on the 2-bedroom ones. Yeah, go ahead.
45 Chamfer rule at 5 meters up. I see a lot of backyard suites without that within the city. Were they getting relaxations or were they?
Yeah, one of the main reasons that we brought some relaxation or some rule changes possibilities is they had established that if they had made the size change rule, the Chamfer rule change, and the parking rule change, that something like 80 or 90% of relaxations wouldn't be required anymore. And so the idea was to now put the rules where we were just basically approving those relaxes over and over again, but still it was a relaxation, and saying, hey, if we don't have to approve a Chamfer rule relax and the size rule relax and this, then we're going to have unrelaxed properties that we can approve. That was the concept behind that, for sure.
Yeah, I don't agree with it. I don't think they should be relaxed because, like as you were saying before, they should be a small unit in someone's backyard.
I think you have to understand the Chamfer rule specifically, though. The amount of space that breaks that rule is almost always just limiting the ability to have an eave. And I think actually most people in the design terms and whatnot think that a house with an eave looks better than one without one, in terms of like an actual hangover, the standard house looking thing. And the reality was, to break the rule, all most people were losing was the eave. And that was the purpose of the Chamfer. So the Chamfer rule wasn't going away. It was going to be adjusted in a way that removed eaves from limitations of the Chamfer rule. So it simply would have allowed eaves into that. And I think personally, I didn't hate it. I wouldn't have necessarily done it, but I didn't hate it because of that, because I do think that that form and architectural interest and stuff does matter. And removing an eave doesn't make much look better, so.
But I think some that are like, the sidewall is only like 1.2 meters from the property line and it goes up like 9 feet garage, 9 feet ceiling on the second.
Yeah, and I guess that's a consideration as to whether or not you agree with the relaxations that the city's granted on them.
All the new communities development like that. Like we have the full house being 3 stories, 2 meters away from each other.
Yeah.
And the whole community is like that, so like really doesn't.
So, but if you buy a new community, you know what you're getting into. If you bought or in an old community, you're like, I'm willing to pay more and have a smaller house but a bigger lot because I don't want these towers all around me. And then the city comes in and says, oh, we're changing our mind on you and adjusting the value of your property.
And your garage, without a suite on it, is allowed to go to 7.5 meters in height. But as soon as there's a suite, you're actually allowed to go higher than that, right? Or sorry, 4.6 meters in height. And then with a suite, you're allowed to go to 7.5. I said that wrong. Can you edit that out? That'd be great. So 4.6 meters in height for a garage. So that's what you're allowed to do. But as soon as you call it a backyard suite, you're allowed 7.5. Well, that's a change, right? That's a significant difference for people, for sure. Yeah. So I think one of the keys here, and actually when we did the incentive, had a couple things worth mentioning. The first is that there was an add-on for bylaw adherence. So we actually increased the amount of money someone got on the incentive if they didn't require any relaxations. And so going back to your point and whether or not it became permitted or not, anybody understands land use bylaw terms in the city of Calgary, I'm not going to try and explain it right now, but contextual single detached or contextual semi-detached. Actually, I'm a really big proponent of a contextual backyard suite. I think that there's a version of a backyard suite in which you adhere to all these spaces and rules, and that's permitted. And we did this in effect by giving people extra money if they met all the rules of the bylaw. And so through the incentive program, we encouraged exactly that. Design things that meet the rules. Yeah. We also did accessibility, and so $7,500 towards that, and we're seeing a huge uptake on this. Once again, if anybody's super awesome and watches council, council on the 22nd through the 21st through the 24th, there was a doctor out of U of C, I think she's a law professor, who is confined to a wheelchair, and came forward and really pushed the proponent of how important backyard suites are for people of mobility, or a decreased mobility, and how cool that is. And yeah, it's that. So of the 7,000 basement suites, I've had about 2 to 3 that took on the $7,500 for accessibility. Of the backyard suites, I'm sitting at somewhere like 20 to 25%. Of all backyard suites will be accessible, or at least are signed up in our program to meet the accessibility standards. Not all of them are, actually. Yeah, I work with a garage suite builder who'll say that they have a couple of their designs that have a shaft for the elevator, and that goes in standard. It becomes a closet on the main floor and a pantry on the second floor, but at any point in time, a $50,000 elevator can be put into it. And when they sell those, they often do with the elevator in them, but they often sell them as a convertible thing later that if the person living in it does have the mobility concern, the shaft for the elevator is actually already built in, and you just have to install the elevator. And so for somewhere around 50, you can get the elevator, a little bit more because you need the shaft as well. But we accept any number of different designs of lifts for the actual elevator. At least these are the numbers he's sharing with me, right? And your thing at the start is perfect for this. I might be out of date. You might have somebody that says you can't do it for less than 70, or somebody that says, hey, I've done it for 30. I don't know, but that's the number I've heard. About 50 for the shaft and the elevator, or just the elevator itself. That's good to hear that you can do it for less than that. That's what they do. So if they're selling it, they sell it for $330 without the elevator and $380 with the elevator. Yeah, we see any number of lifts as well, anytime that it's above grade. We actually see some that are on extremely steep properties that actually almost become at grade, even though it's second floor, or the garage portion is actually below grade almost. And we see those ones able to meet the accessibility standards quite often as well. But this is a great space for this. There's a developer that I met at the engagement for the backyard suite piece, and he says 90% of the at-grade modular built backyard suites that he sells are to a lady around retirement age and a husband or whatnot, whose mom, who no longer has a husband, is now moving into the backyard suite in their backyard. He says that is his market. Like, he doesn't have to sell to anybody else. Just finds widowed women with their oldest daughter or whatnot that's putting them up in their backyard. And that is their absolute.
So I'm just going to make a comment on this because this is a presentation for investors. For sure. If you're considering adding a backyard suite to an existing property that you have that is strictly an investment property, just call me and I will talk to you about it. The numbers do not even remotely come close to making sense for anything other than what you just described.
Yeah.
Another reason, you could buy one, I own one, in fact I own two now. I have backyard suites, but just that difference in the value means that you have to you could use that same amount of investment and buy an entire other property with another really good chunk of land, have better cash flow, and then twice the land appreciating instead of a larger depreciating asset on one small chunk of land.
Yeah, potentially. I think where we see most, and actually I was going to say of the 300, so we sat and signed agreements with every person. I didn't sit for 300 meetings. I signed 300 agreements. I didn't sit for every meeting, but I sat for a crap ton of them. And one of the biggest questions that I asked was just like, well, who's the suite for? And over 70% of the people in this program I built could name the person that's going to live in that suite, which means people that are actually building it for themselves know who's living there. And so that decrease or that loss in potential value, they don't see it because they're not selling the house anytime soon. And even if that person lives there for a period of time they rent, the actual rental side of a backyard suite makes financial sense again. It actually often gets there. The only thing that doesn't in Calgary so far is the sale. And so, yeah, it's not a great flip move, which is actually really good encouragement for a neighbor. You're not seeing somebody come in, buy the house, renovate the thing, throw a backyard suite up and then sell it, because there's not a profit to be made there. So you don't see that dumped in there. You see people that are investing in the spaces they live in. I'd say, I didn't keep track as well, maybe 20% of that 300 was the owner moving out of their house into the backyard suite and making the space of their house available to a family member, a couple to rental or whatnot. They didn't want to leave the area, they didn't want to leave the space, but they didn't need 2,600 square feet anymore. And so the backyard suite became something for them. And so, yeah, somewhere around 70% of every one of those has a name on the person that's going to live there already.
There's a house hack too. I mean, if you want to rent out part of your house, but you don't want someone in your primary dwelling, there's still a good option to get some income while you don't see your tenants every day.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the conversation I had earlier, the Bridgeland one. I mean, when you can get a prime property in Bridgeland and add a rental unit on it that doesn't affect the actual house, like I say, we have people offering over $3,000 a month for that property, for that rental unit, right? So.
Change the value in 10 years too. Like once, as we have more immigration and the population becomes more dense, it may actually raise the value.
Yeah, and I think that you're seeing a lot of people with a different idea around what housing looks like and what forms are needed. And if we continue to see a population that's more interested in integrated generational living, you're going to see an increased value of a property like that. I agree, yeah. But who knows what or when, yeah.
I have a question. You you know, right now I can get a low modular home for a third of that price.
Sure.
Is that something you guys would do?
Yeah, some of them do get approved, absolutely. Yep, you meet the standards. Yeah, so the one thing that I'll warn, and actually is a good segue again here. So we offered up to $35,000 to this program, 15 for the construction cost of a home at 3 different stages. 20,000 is actually associated at 40 cents on the dollar for the infrastructure costs, 10 for the on-site and 10 for the off-site costs. I believe the reason that you can't sell it for what you pay for it is because nobody values the infrastructure. And if it costs you $50,000 to bring power from NMAX, because they have every right to charge you whatever they deem necessary to move power to your new home in the backyard, then they can charge you $50,000. The person renting there doesn't care that you paid $50,000 for that electricity to get to your, they just expect there to be electricity there. The next buyer doesn't really care that you put a bunch of underground infrastructure in from the house to the backyard suite. They expect it to have power and sewer and water and all those pieces. And so that gets priced out. And so the city actually intentionally through this program designed that we covered some of the costs of the base infrastructure. So when you talk about the ADU unit that you're doing that say maybe, I don't even mean 1/3, the 3 to 350 is kind of the full-sized above garage, 2-bedroom backyard suite that we see. We see some reasonable 250s. Anything under 200 is pretty small, generally speaking, either at grade or whatnot, but ADU versions of that. But let's just say it only costs you 130 or 140 to put an ADU on there, maybe a 400 square foot bachelor at grade. It fits almost anywhere. It still could cost you $40,000 or $50,000 to bring the infrastructure to it, because that's still permanent infrastructure, right? And nobody sees that value. Nobody sees that value. And so we intentionally cover up to $20,000, 40% of your costs for that infrastructure through this program, because we recognize that's the spot that actually doesn't make sense to everybody.
Does the new backyard suite requires city tie-ins?
No, it does require city tie. Not necessarily. You can come from your house and go back, but it depends. Your electrical panel may not be able to manage that load. Your water line may have to be replaced back out to the street because it's only a 1/2 inch or it's a 5/8 and it needs to be a 3/4. So there's a number of different things that can come from an increased load. Now that could still happen just by putting a new bedroom in the basement and a new bathroom. You might need a new water line, but when you put a garage suite in, it often triggers those requirements. And so do I see some? And yeah, we absolutely signed deals with some people that had 0 off-site infrastructure costs, which means they were digging a trench from the house to the backyard suite. They ran their gas, their water, their sewer, their power, no problem. You can imagine that costs somewhere around maybe $15,000 to $20,000 for them. Whereas the guy next door, for whatever similar reasons, invisible reasons from a real estate perspective, might have cost them $80,000 because they had to redo the water line to the front and get power from the back and all these other things. Yeah, so I guess I'll speak to this. I had a couple other questions here, but I'll go here. So along with the incentive, which when we took on backyard suites within our program, became the first and most important thing because the money from the feds had a time limit on it and we had to get that out. So we spent our time and energy doing that. But through our engagement process, we actually found that there's probably 4 pillars that need to change in the city to help support backyard suites better. And so over time, we still need feedback and interest around these pieces as well. And so the financial support, obviously, like we said, we launched that program. We have that increase. Education, similar to a guidebook that we did for the secondary suites, I suspect we'll do something like that for backyards. Because we don't expect many people to take on a backyard suite without professionals, whereas we did expect a lot of people to take on a secondary suite without professionals, it'll be different. We're not looking at 68 pages to try and tell you how to build everything having to do with a backyard suite. It'll be different, but still an educational piece to help support people to understand things like the infrastructure piece that we just talked about within that piece. So we're looking to increase that education piece for backyard suites across the city. We're always looking to improve the city processes around that for sure. You saw that with our attempt to try and make it permitted. Obviously that would have potentially decreased some costs and time for people. And you'll continue to see nibbles at that, at the bylaw rules to see what we can do. And then from the internal city's processing perspective side, when I first launched this, it was like, try to find an employee that had processed a backyard suite, like nobody had, because there was so few. Now we're starting to see a little bit more. Well, that road, you know, we've kind of got a gravel road now. I'd like to pave that over the next little bit internally with our processes. And then we're looking for some design simplification pieces. There's some other municipalities that have found success offering backyard suite designs through a competition or whatnot that become available at a reasonable cost, so that, and then they just put up the same, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 designs over and over again. And as a citizen, you just basically purchase the plans from the city for $1,000, and then you go and build it. I don't know if that's exactly what we'll see. And without permitted backyard suites, design simplification and sales like that doesn't really make sense. But we'll continue to look at it. We'll see whether or not there needs to be a design competition, get some designs out there, some stuff that starts to go. The federal government did launch 2 designs for Alberta, which has like a full code compliance side. I think one of the most interesting things is no matter how code compliant you try to make an individual backyard suite, depending on what lot you put it on, it still affects things. So nothing can be completely, you know, wartime home repeatable on every single lot across the city. But we're certainly looking to support some design simplification processes as well. And that's the 4 key pillars that came out of it. So over the next couple of years with backyard suites, hopefully you see us dabble in all of these areas, helping to make the process easier, less expensive, because less expensive might make it more viable. And we'll go from there. What did I have? Did anybody have a backyard suite? Anybody? You have 2, eh? You have one? 4. You have like 1% of the market. That's awesome. Are they legal though? Wait. Oh, there you go, there you go. Yeah. You're off camera. You're not even out here. Yeah. So, but yeah, it's an interesting one. I've been tracking and following. Like I said, myself, I was going to build one. I thought it was an absolute fantastic way. And I don't know, somebody else said it, you know, you want somebody in your space. My wife had no willingness to have someone living in her basement. Zero. You would have had to put a concrete floor with no access to it to get her to allow for that. But she was completely open to a backyard suite. And mostly because we have 2 sets of parents that are in the city of Calgary that we feel like one of those 2 will be responsible for and will eventually need this space. And so we were actually going to build it, rent it for a period of time, expecting one day our parents would move in. We actually ran a great piece when we first launched it. I'll get to you in a sec. Global ran it, I think. A number of, I don't know how the media stuff works. I swear everybody ran the global piece, but whatever. And it was actually a lady, and her parents and his parents are both from China. And basically they built the backyard suite, and her parents live there about 4 months of the year and then go back to China. And his parents come and live there for 4 months of the year, go back to China, and 4 months of the year they Airbnb it, literally. And so, I mean, when you start to talk about why you would have it, I mean, that's incredible for them, right? Like that's just exactly what they want. Because if your parents are going to come live here from China for 4 months, do you really want them in the bedroom next door, or is the backyard suite a much more reasonable spot for them? But they likely don't drive here, or they don't have so, you know, being close by means a lot, right? So you think you see those situations. The thing is, those exist more often than you think, right? So yeah, I guess that's kind of probably technically it. If I was to kind of wrap up, yeah, we've come a long way on secondary suites specifically, starting a different process, but a similar process in and around backyard suites now, which I'm kind of excited about. It will never be the volume that we see in basement suites. It shouldn't be, but certainly you can tell it's an underutilized form here in the city of Calgary. And so we're looking forward to that. But yeah, and I wanted to ask a little bit around like, yeah, what would you guys like to see next? Like Amnesty ends, fees are back in, whatever else, what's going to happen with suites? What do we need to be consciously aware of? How will an increased enforcement action, you know, what could be a value? Because at the end of the day, from my perspective, we're not trying to pay for the department using our fees and our fines, but without amnesty and without an incentive, we're going to still have to push these illegal suites across the line. And how are we going to be successful in that? What will that look like? So feedback on that. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll catch yours, and then I missed yours. I should come back to you.
An adjacent sort of subject, but I live in Southview, and in the Forest Lawn area. And one of the things that you notice if you go up and down a lot of the back alleys there, a number of people have campers parked out in their backyards, right? And although the interest has died down somewhat in recent years, there's also still a sizable tiny home kind of movement. And tiny home is very similar in a lot of ways to an ADU. The great thing from it from a landowner perspective is, I mean, if you're going to build a decent quality backyard suite, there's a lot of infrastructure costs beyond just moving the power, water, whatever, right? And if you can just have similar, very clear guidelines about having, you know, somebody be able to bring their dwelling to you and just charge them for rent and utilities or whatever, right? That would help a significant portion of people who otherwise have a hard time finding affordable places to live. Sure. But I've tried contacting the city a few times about that, and they're basically just don't want to have the conversation at all. They don't really refer you to anything. And everybody you speak to has a different answer if you press them on it. So is there any, I guess, how important of a topic is this becoming? Is there a push towards having any kind of clarity on that kind of thing?
It's a fantastic question, and I'll be somewhat careful with the response to initially. I can tell you when I was in the call center in 2011 initially, if somebody called and said, hey, I want my cousin, he's gonna come live for 6 months in my backyard in the RV, we were able to say, oh, sorry, you can't do that. The reason why was because the only space in the city of Calgary that allowed from that from a land use perspective was a campground, which is a listed use in the city of Calgary, and or a trailer park with the two spaces in, and your house was not zoned for either of those two things. And so in 2011, the answer was no. Through a number of unintentional bylaw changes, that's not necessarily the case anymore. I won't get too much into that, but COVID certainly had some effect on that. There was a demand and a requirement of the city to find a way to allow for that during the pandemic. And so through that, it became a thing. Now, if you're talking about HGTV and you're talking about a tiny home, here's the problem for the city of Calgary on the tiny home front. As soon as you take it off the wheels and it's no longer an RV, it needs to meet Alberta Building Code. No tiny home with a half-size thing and a staircase that goes up the side and allows a loft bed will ever meet building code, period. It just will never meet building code. RV has a different level of requirements from a code perspective. And that's where a tiny home will fit and meet those rules. And when I'm speaking to a tiny home, I'm speaking to the ones I think you're talking about, which are truly tiny homes, not ADUs that are small, but tiny homes. Which means it's a catch-22. If you put the wheels on, you can kind of have it, you can kind of do your thing, but it's not really permanent and it's not really a space, and maybe you get away with it, but there's some questionable and there's some alternate interpretations of the rules and what's allowed and what's not, and was it only allowed for the purpose of the pandemic or not, and who would enforce on it and who wouldn't enforce on it. From the city's perspective even, is it a development problem, is it a building problem, is it a community services problem, is it a bylaw issue? Versus as soon as you take it off the wheels, you now have to have permanent services and meet Alberta Building Code. And so that's the catch-22 on it. So you're never really gonna see a true tiny home put into the backyard of a city, Calgary home and taken off of its wheels as like a ADU tiny home. It will never pass here, based off of code. But there's a potential space for one of the things that you're exactly what you're saying, truly the RV that's there. Now, there are spaces that you're allowed to park an RV on your lot, whether it's been utilized or not. Some are allowed and some aren't. Just parking of it, never mind the using of it, right? And so there's some nuance there. And so it's a soft answer for sure. I'm not the exact right person to answer the direct, can I do X on this lot here, whatnot. But the answer is there is gray and there is room for an unattached, on wheels still, tiny home to exist in backyards. depending on where and how and whatnot. But the second it's no longer that and it's permanent fixture, it's full code requirement. Hopefully that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, I mean, if it's not on wheels, then there's no why you're still putting in infrastructure, still the proper suite.
Yeah.
So I totally get that.
Yeah. And so I can't point to the rule change that is different from when I was told in 2011 to tell every person that you couldn't do it to now. I can't point to the bylaw or how the use of single family home or RCG has changed in this way that now allows for an RV to be parked and used on your lot. But back then we were told to say no, and now maybe not so much. So I don't know how to square that for you right now, but the pandemic did some weird, crazy things, if we're honest. So yeah, go ahead.
So part of this would be, so the city, I think you even alluded to this too, is that the city, every time they talk about suites, so like, look, we know where all the backyard suites are. We just decided to do this first to let people legalize them. So you're kind of repeating that today, saying the enforcement's likely going to start soon. So given that the city has spent the last 8 years or so telling people that the expiry date isn't really an expiry date by precedent 4 times in a row.
Yeah.
It's kind of like I do have a lot of clients who are like, oh yeah, I got the egress windows, I just don't have time to go through the process, right? And I'm like, you should get to it. Like they always say they're gonna end it, they're never gonna end it. So now you've kind of given people that impression.
Yeah.
So is it not to some degree unfair to then say, like, so now we're gonna rip it away, then we'll start enforcing? Like, why is the city not calling everybody right now saying, look, we know you have a suite, we know you haven't legalized it. You got 4 months. Like, why not give people that warning?
I didn't say we weren't.
What's that?
I didn't say we weren't.
You didn't say you weren't.
I didn't say we weren't doing that.
Oh, I know I didn't
Yeah.
say you said that.
Yeah, no. And
I don't know anybody who said that.
all I'm softly saying is that we have an absolute backlog list of ones that we're aware of, and every single one of them is and will be contacted between now and the end of the year.
Wow, okay.
So you are actually going to be calling those. Oh, good.
Ones that we're aware of. Now, we're not aware of everything. You'll see the launch of this campaign is the closure of the incentive program. It will start to put seeds in people's place about the 4 months for the amnesty. You will then see another piece of media probably in November. That would be my gut, is November. That will be like, no, this is really it. The truth beyond that whole thing is, as confident as I am that it will go away, council can do whatever they want leading all the way up until that moment it's gone. And even after it's gone, they could do whatever they want. And so the indication is that most people believe it's the end. When I took it to council 3 years ago, I remember 2 out of the councillors that voted yes for it at committee both sat in their piece and said, but I think probably the last time. I think that was kind of an indication of, we did like a 2.5 or almost 3 year extension the last time. I could go back and check the dates. I think everybody got the sense that that was like, yeah, this is it. Yeah. One of the things that we've seen that actually made it really difficult is when we launched the amnesty in 2018, every single suite that existed up till that point met the amnesty rules. It was great. 5 years in, you've got every suite that got built since 2018 till 2023 that got built in between there or renovated, and man, it gets complicated now to determine whether or not the space you're sitting in qualifies or doesn't qualify. I have a permanent thing for MLS just so that we can get the access to see whether or not this house got sold with an unfinished basement in 2019, which means that it doesn't qualify even though there's clearly an existing suite there now. And I think unfortunately, well, a lot of that had a positive input. I think we still saw those people that saw the opportunity to put it in illegally, then try and get the advantage of the reduction in requirements and then legalize it and went, now I've made my money. And unfortunately, that group of people is why it needs to come to an end. Yeah. Because the codes guys hate this, right? Like difference in levels of code that they have to apply, and they think that people are trying to pull the veil over their eyes. Like that just doesn't land well. And so the general consensus is that it has played a really big, important part in accomplishing what we've accomplished, but it's probably run its course.
When you have a good point, Santosh and I go through this on a daily basis. It is getting quite difficult to figure out if a suite is on that line, right? The March 2018.
Yeah.
Like sometimes we have a listing that's from like, 2019 and the suite's there and it's illegal, and then the previous listing is never, or sometimes 1960 and there's nothing in between, and it's like, well, it probably was there, but was it? Like it's hard to tell, right?
It is. And it's extremely difficult for us too. Whereas on March 12th or whatever, 2018, it was super simple. It was really easy. Can I go walk there right now and see it? Yeah, okay, well, you're approved, right? Like that was easy. The most common thing that we see is that we'll see, honestly, and I mean, I'm trying to trade secrets, but Google Maps, you go back to a listing from 2020 and you look and there's no side entrance, and then all of a sudden 2024 there is. Now, did the suite exist before the side entrance? Did it really meet the requirements of a suite before that, or is it really put in after? And so, yeah, that's another thing that we see.
Investigative work at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, I talked to the inspectors about this when we started doing it. I was like, the level of Sherlock is a little bit up to you, right? Like, I'm not telling you that if you ever put one forward and it qualified for amnesty and somebody finds some nugget of information that shows that factually it wasn't there before, it's not like that's somehow the end of the world. But if you see something, you got to stop it. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts? Or yeah, go ahead.
A few years ago, particularly near the height of the crisis of not having the housing crisis in Calgary, which was a big prompting for some of the changes, right? One of the biggest constant complaints about trying to get places approved is that you start the process, you have an inspector come, they have one set of rules and expectations, they leave, the next inspector would come, they completely disregard what the previous one said. I know of several developments that basically either fell apart financially just because the inspectors and the city couldn't really come up with a clear answer about how to address issues. Is that still an ongoing issue, or how did that come about, that there wasn't more consistency applied across how inspectors would handle a particular problem?
Yeah, so a couple ways to approach the answer to this. The first being, I don't know if you've ever sat in the room with 45 code employees, but I guarantee I could find a conflict between every single one of them on something around the interpretation of the code. And every one of them has things that they look for and things that they're not as worried about. Across the city, they do their best to keep consistency. They have standards and rules and meetings and whatever else. What really made it difficult, because I think for the most part they're quite successful, despite the fact that they all have a slightly different interpretation of a code book that looks like that, right? Is that because the suite's amnesty specifically isn't embedded in code in the same way, and it's a provincially allowed for alternative solution, it was extremely difficult to keep everyone on the same page on that. And so the level of interest and acceptance of the amnesty in general across the codes team was difficult to navigate, and which elements would stick with it. And it sounds like I'm making some excuses for them, but it's really quite difficult. When you go into a basement that was built in 1970 and has had a suite likely since then, but have done a bunch of recent work, how much of the things that don't meet any level of code are okay to leave behind versus need that to come up, even if it's not specifically related to the fact that there's a suite there. Ceiling heights, railings, the underside of a staircase and whether that needs a smoke seal versus not, and which compartment is it in, and is the caulking that somebody put on with their fingers good enough for a smoke seal, or do I need to see it mudded and taped? Is that space there small enough that you can just put some wool insulation in there, or is it big enough that you should have drywalled it? It's tough. That's tough. What's not hard is a brand new suite in the middle of Silverado that just got built that meets all the standards and the sizes are great and everything else. That's easy. That's easy to stay consistent on, right? So it was those ones. What we did to address that through the program was we made the inspector, we had at its peak, we had 4 inspection zones for suites, for existing suites. Right now I only have 2. So if you have an existing suite in the city right now, you have 1 of 2 inspectors. It is a lot easier for me to keep consistency across what we're interpreting across 2 inspectors. And even then, I know that they have a difference of opinions on how much Sherlock they might do, on what key elements of a basement that they go into that they believe they do. But what we did is we attached that to the plans review piece, and we kept the inspector consistent across your whole process, which meant that they were accountable for what they told you at plans review, which means that we stopped a different code guy comes and calls something different. And so we recognize that that's an issue. We tried to address it both through consistency as well as reducing the opportunity for that problem to arise. But come the end of Amnesty, come the end of that piece, the inspection side of our program will return to the normal level of business. And that might be something that comes back up. But without Amnesty, we're likely not looking at the same issue. Yeah, we'll see. It's probably, so as the executive advisor to the director for 4 years, one of the top 3 issues in complaints that we saw in that office was that. Different interpretation by a different inspector that is now asking for additional work, and I just spent all my money doing the thing that the last guy asked for. Yeah, so we really tried to eliminate it as best I can. And I'm not making excuses that says it's okay that we did that. I really don't think it is. Do our best to not do that and stay consistent. But yeah, it was harder than normal. And we did improve it by shrinking the number of people that had to agree. Yeah.
Well, you're gonna stick around for us.
Yeah, I'll be here.